Section 7, and help to build a better world. Gentlemen, this is the last of these formal divisions of my monologic presentation, and I want to begin it by reading to you the first 3 stanzas of O'Shaughnessy's great ode, The Music Makers. We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams, wandering by lone sea breakers and sitting by desolate streams, world losers and world forsakers, on whom the pale moon gleams. Yet we are the movers and shakers of the world forever, it seems. With wonderful deathless ditties we build up the world's great cities, and out of a fabulous story we fashion an empire's glory. One man with a dream at pleasure shall go forth and conquer a crown, and 3 with a new song's measure can trample an empire down. We, in the ages lying in the buried past of the earth, built Nineveh with our sighing, and Babel itself with our mirth, and overthrew them with prophesying to the old of the new world's worth. For each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth. Now the whole poem, including the many stanzas I did not read, seems to me an impressive tribute to the power of imagination to design and direct the course of history. But I really read that much of it simply to put in their proper setting just these 2 lines. For each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth. For the last 50 years, our age has been a dream that was dying. To this very group, at this very moment, I am proposing that we turn our faces forward instead of backward, begin to make even our defensive actions fit into a constructive design, and do our parts to usher in a new age that is coming to birth. I don't expect the New York Times to begin announcing excitedly in January that obviously the world started on a new era in Indianapolis in December 1958. Of course, it is only the work we do afterwards, the work we persuade and inspire others to do, and the long results and widening reach of both that can make of this meeting anything but a 2-day seminar in philosophy and current affairs. But if every man here should leave tonight feeling in his own mind that he had been at the beginning of a new chapter in history, it would be true. It would be true no matter how long the historians might take to find it out. The basic reason why the old age is dying, as I tried to make clear yesterday, is that the faith which was the core of its strength no longer commands the unquestioning loyalty of enough of its devotees. For the dream of any nation or any people must depend on faith. The foundation of our new dream must be faith, or it will never come to pass. Where is this faith, and what is this faith? So true that neither our hearts nor our reasons can deny it, so broad that it takes in without violation the faith of our fathers, and so deep that it can inspire martyrdom at need. As to where, it is right in front of us, and as to what, it is exactly what we in this room already and actually believe. To try to make this clear, in the only convincing way I know, I'm going to do what no man likes to do. I'm going to try to tell you what I really believe in the areas that are considered parts of a man's religion. For Emerson said, it is the outlook of genius to feel that what is true of yourself is also true of all mankind. Making no claim to genius, I'll still try to imitate one for this occasion. Now, first let me repeat here, for the devout Catholics and fundamentalist Protestants, who are among my best friends and strongest supporters, that it is no part of my purpose to disturb their beliefs in the slightest, or the beliefs of any man or woman who really does have a religious faith instead of just the shell of one. What I am concerned about, what we must all be vitally concerned about today, as the very essence of our problem, is morality, integrity, and purpose. That morality must be based on a bedrock of faith. For those who already have such a bedrock of faith and stand on it and abide by it, I can offer nothing, and I would certainly take nothing away. But for those who are no longer sure exactly where they do stand, on what rocks or how firmly, I want to try to show them that all of these bedrocks together constitute a foundation with room and strength for us all. For unless we willingly anchor our moral judgments to eternal truths, we become just chaff, blown always before the winds of confusion. So let me, however reluctantly, point to the rocks of my own faith, not for the devout and the fundamentalists who do not need it, but for others whom possibly I may help. The keystone to my own religious belief, I think, was best delineated by Tennyson in just one great line. For I doubt not through the ages one increasing purpose runs. Neither Tennyson nor any other sane man could doubt this fact, as we shall emphasize presently. But first, let us ask, whose purpose, God's or man's? But if man has had one increasing purpose through the ages, from what source did it come, and who decided what the direction of that purpose was to be? The fundamentalist Christian says immediately that a divine being created man with this purpose predetermined, and I agree. Nor do I wish to disturb his understanding of how God created man. I personally think that, at the present level of our knowledge, we must conceive of this divine being having done so by creating Milky Ways and astronomical universes with laws and purposes which caused planets like our Earth to develop, and by creating evolutionary forces which both produced man and endowed him with purpose greater than his individual self. I think that if this Creator allows man to continue to grow and his purpose to continue to increase, our knowledge will reach a level in another few thousand years where even this concept will seem far too detailed against the broader and larger forces we can then glimpse, that even this present concept will seem to have viewed the Creator as far too close, too understandable, and too provincial a power against the remoteness, majesty, and omnipotence then conceivable. Just as the details of man's creation, as our forefathers understood the book of Genesis, seem to some of us now to have obscured a concept of incredible grandeur by man's egocentric insistence on bringing God down almost to his own size. But our fundamentalist ancestors believed that God created man and God is great. We must agree completely. We merely feel today that God is infinitely greater than those ancestors were yet allowed to see. When we first start to study mathematics, the childish mind finally grasps that such large numbers as 1,000 times 1,000 do not make any dent on the measure of infinity. But it is hard for the child to realize that neither does a billion to the billionth power put him one whit nearer to the edges of infinity than before he started. An adult man finds the same difficulty with his religious concepts. It is hard for man to realize that the infinite still remains infinite, untouched in its remoteness and unreduced in its infinity by man's most ambitious approaches, or that all of man's increasing knowledge leaves the unknowable just as completely unknowable as before. But I think that, being allowed now to grasp this truth, we should cease to quarrel and disagree over how close we are to God. For we are using a term which, in a literal context or objectively, has no meaning. We can then each put the God we worship as close to ourselves subjectively as our own faith and understanding dictate, and agreeing that a Creator greater than ourselves has visibly endowed us with purpose, we can give far more of our energy and dedication to serving that purpose better. That there is a purpose in man beyond anything called for by his individual needs and far greater than his personal desires can be denied only by the most depraved maniac or the most ignorant fool. One of the best summarizations of the force and beauty and eternal quality of that purpose is contained in William Herbert Caruth's Each in His Own Tongue, which I should like to recall to your minds. And gentlemen, lest some of you think there is anything blasphemous or even too secular in my repeated reference to the poets in this discussion, let me point out to you that the men who wrote many of the books of the Old Testament and those who wrote most of the books of the New Testament were the poetic spirits of their respective ages. Theirs were the minds on which their contemporaries and successors depended to interpret and phrase man's most profound thoughts, most permanent beliefs, and deepest faith. Those same interpretations and recordings and expressions of man's developing experience, beliefs, and faith do not come to us today as further books added to our Bible, but they are being given to us with greater and easier understanding than we might otherwise achieve by the same kind of reverent and poetic minds. So here is Caruth's justly famous poem. A fire mist and a planet, a crystal and a cell, a jellyfish and a saurian, and caves where the cavemen dwell. Then a sense of law and beauty, and a face turned from the clod. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. A haze on the far horizon, the infinite tender sky, the ripe rich tint of the cornfields, and the wild geese sailing high, and all over upland and lowland the charm of the goldenrod. Some of us call it autumn, and others call it God. Like tides on a crescent sea beach, when the moon is new and thin, into our hearts high yearnings come welling and surging in, come from the mystic ocean whose rim no foot has trod. Some of us call it longing, and others call it God. A picket frozen on duty, a mother starved for her brood, Socrates drinking the hemlock, and Jesus on the rood, and millions who, humble and nameless, the straight, hard pathway plod. Some call it consecration, and others call it God. Who can read that, realize the incontrovertible and wonderful truth of the story of man's purpose at work, which the poet tells, and fail to feel reverently bound to serve that same purpose faithfully and well? This brings me to the second keystone, if any such contradictory figure of speech is allowed, in my own personal belief. It is the answer to the question, what is that purpose? And this, too, has been summarized by yet another poet, Harry Kemp, in just one brilliant line, quote, "Thou hast put an upward reach in the heart of man," unquote. In fact, it seems to me that to make us truly religious, we do not need to know anything more about God, man, and man's relationship to God than is given by a reverent understanding of that line. Thou hast put an upward reach in the heart of man. And again, it makes no difference to me, and it is a subjective matter which should cause no disagreement between us, how each one feels that this upward reach has been inculcated into the heart of man. But the thoroughness with which it has been done is a majestic revelation. For look with me first at the common denominators of all of our great religions. That man shall not steal, which further means that man shall recognize and respect property rights, is common to them all. So is the injunction that man shall not murder, nor harm his fellow man. So are the concepts of kindness and charity and restraint of appetites and industriousness and respect for age and experience and gratitude for favors received and an individual's responsibility for his trespasses and the expectation of justice and faith in a happier future and obeisance to the laws and morals and temporal government of the time and age, and a reverence for a power or powers greater than man himself, and of course a dozen others, both general and specific, that I have not named. But gentlemen, please note these are also exactly the characteristics with which evolutionary selection has gradually endowed man, to enable him to rise out of an animal existence, haltingly but surely, towards a more humane civilization and a promise of a tremendously more wonderful future. In fact, the very word upward, as we use it here, can be taken to describe and define those traits which, found in some species and not found in others, caused those favored species to outstrip their rivals and to come upward through the evolutionary competition until one such species became civilized man. One philosopher will tell you that the possession of these upward traits in some species was purely an accident of nature. Another that it was due to the plan of a divine being. To me, they are both saying the same thing. Let's take one or two very simple illustrations. Today, man finds a rose garden beautiful, and the view of clear running water so pleasurable that he builds countless fountains to make his landscapes charming. Originally, of course, the presence of flowers like the rose meant fertile soil, the kind of sunny climate in which birds and bees and man all thrived, and the absence of noxious jungle, while clear running water originally meant that man had escaped from desert or jungle to an area to which he was far better adjusted for sustaining life and making it more pleasant. But do these facts from man's biological history make the rose or running water or man's love for both any less wonderful? The same thing is true with regard to those gradually acquired characteristics of his own animal nature and later human personality, which converted him from monkey to primate to barbarian, then to a man so far civilized that the male proposes deferentially to the weaker female before he will even touch her, in satisfaction of the second strongest impulse of his being. Does the fact that these characteristics, which together constitute the upward reach, were acquired by man or given to him through the mechanics of evolutionary competition, if they were, does this make them any less wonderful, or reduce in the slightest our gratitude to a Creator who provided that upward reach? Why do we have to feel that the best qualities of man were given to us full-blown by some more direct magic? Or how could any magic be greater than that so inadequately described here? More important than either question, what difference does it make, so far as our clear duty to use and strengthen all impulses of the upward reach is concerned? Not only are we a part of some mighty purpose beyond our understanding, and not only do we have a clear duty to be true to that purpose to the fullest extent that we are allowed to grasp its workings and its direction, but all human experience shows that the total happiness of any generation and of its posterity is directly tied to the respect of that generation for the upward reach in man's nature. We have all the reason here that man can ask, divine or human or pragmatic, for keeping our consciences attuned to the emotions and impulses which increase man's upward reach, and for then obeying those consciences, obeying by commission as well as omission, to the utmost of our respective will powers and abilities. Now let me assure you that, in my opinion, all of this brief adventure into theological philosophy does have direct bearing on even the most practical problems we are yet to consider. And since I am hereby participating in the first confessional of my life, and wearing my heart more openly on my sleeve than I have ever done before, let me go all of the way and translate these basic motivations into the specific form in which their impact hammers away with a comforting persistence on my particular conscience. I first broke through the intellectually restricting bonds of the unusually narrow Southern Baptist fundamentalism in which I was raised more than 40 years ago. I loved everything about it except the specific details of its dogma. As a result of its teachings, I saw myself as the inheritor of all the labor and sacrifice that had gone before me by men who had used this God-given upward reach. They had used it to provide the moral codes, the humane traditions, the accumulation of knowledge, and the material comforts to make me so fortunate an heir of so many ages, to whatever extent I was equal to my inheritance. I felt myself bound by a gentleman's code, which is just another way of expressing continuing human brotherhood or loyalty, to live up to the standards and carry on the ideals of men who had died hundreds and even thousands of years before I was born. The substance of my conscience, as I believe it is really the substance of the conscience of every man in this room, was gratitude and a corresponding sense of responsibility. Gratitude, if you will let me paraphrase Henley's line without the slightest implication of blasphemy, gratitude to whatever God there was, and gratitude to all of the noble men of the past for the life and the environment for that life which was given me, and responsibility to God and man to be worthy, so far as I was able, of the human race at its best. And gentlemen, what firmer foundation can we possibly need for the faith on which to build our new age and with which to inaugurate the dream that is coming to birth? Wherever we turn, in looking at whatever blessings we have for the present and hopes for the future, we find a need for gratitude that makes the acceptance of responsibility a duty and a source of inward happiness. Consider, for instance, and for an instant, the blessing of freedom. Kipling once wrote truly, "All we know of freedom, all we need to know, this our fathers won for us long and long ago." Are we, as Lowell put it, going to be traitors to our sires and lose that freedom for our children and their children? Macaulay had Horatius say, "And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?" And so we ask ourselves in simple sincerity, as I did in the article A Letter to Khrushchev, If it becomes necessary, just how can man die better, especially if in doing so he appreciably reduces the odds faced by his compatriots in their fight against the overwhelming forces of evil threatening us today? But our reason for gratitude and corresponding responsibility extends to every field and corner of the civilization we now enjoy, perhaps for so short a time longer. It is worthwhile remembering now and then men like Hugh Latimer. In 1555, and he and his friend Ridley were being burned at the stake for heresy, and all he had to do to save his life was to say the proper words of recantation. His veneration for spiritual freedom and truth caused him to say instead, quote, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out," unquote. There are thousands of men like him to whose veneration for the upward reach in the heart of man we owe the very fact that we can sit in this room today and discuss religious matters without fear. But it is not even to the martyrs, perhaps, that we owe the most. There have been missionaries and scholars, the Catholic monks of the Middle Ages, poets and philosophers, builders and explorers, statesmen and scientists, throughout centuries receding into the unknown past, who have toiled and dreamed and sacrificed and died, that you and I might have the comforts and freedoms and hopes that we enjoy now in so fair and happy a land. One of the worst and most sadly disturbing traits of many of our young people today is that they take their inheritance for granted and have no thought of its cost. This is a vital part of the moral breakdown that is endangering our civilization. It shows how basic and necessary a component of faith is man's feeling of continuity and gratitude. Let us, with a faith for the future based on this very principle of gratitude to God and man, lived up to by ourselves and made a living and articulate faith for others by both example and teaching, let us try to bring many of these young people who are now at loose ends because of their lack of any faith back into the conscious current of man's increasing purpose. For a code of honor and an ennobling sense of responsibility are themselves gifts to the human soul which have been won by its upward reach. And so, gentlemen, I have tried to give you, freely and frankly, the substance of my own religious beliefs. And without any claim to goodness, wisdom, or originality, I have tried, in far too short a time for so huge a subject, to indicate to you the elements of a faith which I still hope and believe is shared by all of you, no matter how differently you might have explained or expressed it. It is a faith for which I have earnestly hoped that it might encompass the individual beliefs of most men of goodwill, that it might refill our ancient founts of inspiration, and that it would become a basis and a beginning of renewed dedication to a dream of man's future. Section 8, through the John Birch Society. Now, how do we go about asking men, in the words of Santayana, to, quote, trust the soul's invincible surmise, unquote? How do we go about all of the immediately more urgent tasks and undertakings which I have been foreshadowing, of which this moral and ethical base is the bedrock to be chiseled into a more recognizable foundation as we go along? We come at long last to the question of ways and means and methods, to what our bureaucratic friends would call implementation, in connection with all of these plans and aims and hopes. In the earlier sections of this long and fragmented discourse, I used the word organization several times in connection with suggested future plans. It was a very broad and inaccurate term, employed because no other was available to convey the thought there being expressed without too much interruption of that thought. But the organization of which I am thinking is of an entirely different nature from anything that word might at first bring to your minds, just as the raising of resources is of a far more drastic and more realistic nature than anything attempted in this fight before. I am proposing, as the most immediately tangible outcome of this meeting, the formation of the John Birch Society, and I ask you not to give undue thought at present to the name. In the small packets for each of you, there are copies of my little book, The Life of John Birch. I hope you will read it when you have the opportunity, if you have not already done so, or even if you have. You will find that John Birch, a young fundamentalist Baptist preacher from Macon, Georgia, who did as much as any other one man, high or low, to win our war and the Chinese war against the Japanese in China, was murdered by the Chinese communists at the first opportunity after the war because of the powerful resistance he would have been able to inspire against them. You will find, and I believe agree, that John Birch possessed in his own character all of those noble traits and ideals which we should like to see become symbolized by the John Birch Society, and the kind of life of peaceful opportunity and responsibility which John Birch wanted for his fellow Americans and for his Chinese friends and for all men of goodwill is exactly the kind of life we should like to see possible everywhere. We could use other names than that of John Birch, of course, but I think you will gradually see, as time and meditation do their work, that the name is fitting, significant, and helpful in many ways and for many reasons. It is important that it should be, for I am not suggesting any ephemeral organization of loose ties and uncertain loyalties. It is my fervent hope that the John Birch Society will last for hundreds of years and exert an increasing influence for the temporal good and the spiritual ennoblement of mankind throughout those centuries. For I am staking my whole aspiration to play my part in forwarding man's one increasing purpose on whatever can be accomplished through the John Birch Society. I want no other title than that of its founder, and have no other ambition for anything resembling fame or historical remembrance. The John Birch Society is to be a monolithic body. A Republican form of government or of organization has many attractions and advantages under certain favorable conditions, but under less happy circumstances, it lends itself too readily to infiltration, distortion, and disruption. And democracy, of course, in government or organization, as the Greeks and Romans both found out, and as I believe every man in this room clearly recognizes, democracy is merely a deceptive phrase, a weapon of demagoguery, and a perennial fraud. For withstanding the stresses and strains of internal differences and external animosities throughout changing political climates over long periods of time, for the building of morale and loyalty and a feeling of unified purpose and closely knit strength, for effective functioning in periods of crisis and a permanence of high dedication throughout more peaceful decades, for these and many other reasons, the John Birch Society will operate under completely authoritative control at all levels. The fear of tyrannical oppression of individuals and other arguments against the authoritative structure in the form of governments have little bearing on the case of a voluntary association where the authoritative power can be exercised and enforced only by persuasion, and what little validity they do have is outweighed by the advantages of firm and positive direction of the Society's energies, especially for the near future and for the fight against communism, which is the first great task of the Society. It is imperative that all the strength we can muster be subject to smoothly functioning direction from the top. As I have said before, no collection of debating societies is ever going to stop the communist conspiracy from taking us over, and I have no intention of adding another frustrated group to their number. We mean business every step of the way. There are many reasons why, in the fight immediately ahead, we cannot stop for parliamentary procedures or a lot of arguments among ourselves. One is the increasing confusion, cleverly planned by the communists, as to what persons, books, activities, and organizations really are anti-communist. In other words, we are now being more and more divided and deceived by accepting within our walls more and more Trojan horses, large and small, made out of all kinds of timbers and with all kinds of enemy agents inside. Some of them have no more harmful purpose than merely to drain off into innocuous wastefulness money and effort which might otherwise find its way into really patriotic and anti-communist activities. Others are primarily designed to offer protective coloration to communists who can thus get themselves publicized as active in anti-communist organizations. Others, like the very pretentious American Friends of Vietnam, in my opinion, form major parts of a whole plan and drive for gradually turning some country over to the communists while pretending to be leading the opposition. But most of them are intended, as much as anything else, to add to and create the increasing confusion which makes even the most patriotic American feel utterly frustrated in trying to figure out who is friend and who is enemy, and hence more willing to give up the whole struggle. Now, there are ways of sizing up both individuals and organizations in this battle which come only with experience, a knowledge of the interlocking pieces and personalities, and a feel for the way the communists work. And while, of course, I can make mistakes too, I know from the way my opinion of various characters, formed entirely independently, has then proved to coincide with the opinion of J.B. Matthews, time after time when I have had a chance to check with him, that I have a fairly sensitive and accurate nose in this area. And of course, I also have the benefit of J.B.'s files, almost incredible memory, and judgment built out of long experience to lean on whenever I wish. So we do not intend to be frustrated by indecisions of this nature, nor to let our members be. But the confusion and the problem will get steadily worse, and the need for somebody who can simply say, help this guy, or let him help you, but stay away from that one, is also going to increase. Actually, we are going to cut through the red tape and parliamentary briar patches and roadblocks of confused purpose with direct authority at every turn. The men who join the John Birch Society during the next few months or few years are going to be doing so primarily because they believe in me and what I am doing and are willing to accept my leadership anyway. And we are going to use that loyalty, like every other resource, to the fullest possible advantage that we can, whenever and wherever, either through infiltration by the enemy or honest differences of opinion, that loyalty ceases to be sufficient to keep some fragment in line. We are not going to be in the position of having the Society's work weakened by raging debates. We are not going to have factions develop on the two sides to every question theme. Those members who cease to feel the necessary degree of loyalty can either resign or will be put out before they build up any splintering following of their own inside the Society. As I have said, we mean business every step of the way. We can allow for differences of opinion. We shall need and welcome advice, and we expect to use the normal measure of diplomacy always called for in dealing with human beings. But whenever differences of opinion become translated into a lack of loyal support, we shall have shortcuts for eliminating both without going through any Congress of so-called democratic processes. Otherwise, communist infiltrators could bog us down in interminable disagreements, schisms, and feuds before we ever became seriously effective. The purpose of the John Birch Society, as officially stated, will be to promote less government, more responsibility, and a better world. The purpose, as unofficially described and discussed among ourselves, will be exactly the same thing. Our short-range purpose, our long-range purpose, and our lasting purpose is to promote less government, more responsibility, and a better world. That says it all. It is, I think, simple, understandable, and all-inclusive as to the goals for which we should strive. In seeking the first two of those broad objectives, less government and more responsibility, we shall make all the use we can of educational action on the political front. In always seeking more slowly but with an inner unswerving resolution to make this a better world, we shall use all means and depend on all efforts that are consistent with the faith which supplies our motivation. In the political arena, we shall try to make the word Americanism useful as a constructive opposite of communism, and attract to our support many Americanists who may not be members of our society. But the words Americanism and Americanist are simply semantic weapons and have no direct connection with the John Birch Society. Members of the John Birch Society, not only in the United States, but anywhere in the world, not only can be good patriots in their respective countries, but necessarily will be. For internationalism, as it is conceived and promoted today, is an attempt to impose more government and a more centralized one-world government on all of us everywhere. For that reason, it is automatically contrary to everything we stand for, and one of the movements we shall oppose with all the strength we can. An honestly intended federation of nations, in some later years or decades, for the legitimate purpose of increasing the freedom of individuals, goods, and cultures to cross national boundaries, and hence for the very purpose of decreasing governmental restrictions on individuals, is something we would support with all our hearts. But until the intended Communist Internationale, now called the United Nations, has been wiped out or made over from the bottom up, our attitude towards so-called internationalism is made clear and uncompromising by the stated purpose of the society. As Richard Cobden said, quote, "Peace will come to this earth when her peoples have as much as possible to do with each other, their governments the least possible," unquote. It is axiomatic that we shall strive to hasten the world's approach to those conditions in every way we can. We come now to the question which I know has been in the forefront of the thoughts of some of you for quite a while. What are the organizational mechanics of the John Birch Society, and how do we go about building up its membership so that it is anything but paper and conversation? The John Birch Society will function almost entirely through small local chapters, usually of from 10 to 20 dedicated patriots, although some chapters may occasionally and for a while be larger. Each will have a chapter leader appointed by headquarters, which is in Belmont, Massachusetts, or appointed through officers of the society in the field who have themselves been duly appointed by headquarters. The dues are whatever the member wants to make them, with a minimum of $24 per year for men and $12 per year for women. But we shall prefer to have these dues paid by each member of a local chapter monthly, at $2 per month for men and $1 per month for women, to his or her chapter leader. This is for many reasons, some of which are obvious, and it will be the responsibility of each chapter leader to collect such dues regularly and forward them to headquarters. Because we shall have people who want to join the John Birch Society, however, in parts of the country where we do not yet have any chance of establishing chapters, and because for a while their number will increase, we also have a home chapter which they can join. The differences are that we cannot afford to have dues paid to the home chapter except annually in one lump sum of $24 or more for men and $12 or more for women, because otherwise we should dissipate too much of the dues money in bookkeeping costs, and that our contact with home chapter members will be largely through printed bulletins, even as to the work we ask them to do, rather than through personal contact. In the case of local chapters, we should expect the chapter leader to get all of his or her members together at least once a month, and in many cases oftener, as well as on any special occasions which may make such a meeting advisable. And we expect the chapter leader to be in practically continuous contact with his or her members to whatever extent may be necessary in order to pass on or receive information and to carry out various concerted efforts as requested from headquarters. For handling the organizational mechanics of the society and for helping to form new chapters, we shall have a paid staff man with the title of coordinator for each area of the proper size. Above these coordinators in time, we shall have supervisors with the rank or title of major coordinators, and we shall further build the organizational framework from the bottom up as made necessary by sufficient membership in order to keep strict and careful control on what every chapter is doing, and even every member of every chapter, so far as the effective work of the John Birch Society is concerned. Let me point out here, too, that while such coordinators and eventually major coordinators will receive salaries and expenses according to their work and their ability, neither the chapter members nor even the chapter leaders who form the base of our society and who cumulatively do most of the work that counts, nor I myself and other top officers will receive any pay whatsoever. It is only those in the middle who will receive any remuneration, because there is where we simply must utilize paid staff for organizational needs. We are out to get 1 million members truly dedicated to the things in which we believe. This, we are well aware, will take time and tremendous effort and dedication on our own part, greater than that we ask of anybody else. But there are 1 million good patriots who are also men and women of goodwill and good character and humane conscience in America who are just waiting to join the John Birch Society as fast as we can carry the story to them. There are 1 million such men and women in America who would join the John Birch Society tonight if they knew as much about it as you men in this room do right now. And I think that 1 million members is all we would want, at least in the United States, for we need disciplined pullers at the oars and not passengers in the boat. Now, that last statement may put you in mind of the communist principle of, quote, the dedicated few, unquote, as enunciated by Lenin. And we are, in fact, willing to draw on all successful human experience in organizational matters, so long as it does not involve any sacrifice of morality in the means used to achieve an end. But the communists have asked their followers to devote to the cause, quote, the whole of their lives, unquote. We assuredly do not. For if you were required to make everything else subordinate and give to the John Birch Society the whole of your lives, we might as well let the communists take over in the first place. That is exactly the kind of collectivism, of submerging the individual in the whole, against which we are fighting. And while there will be some of us, an increasing number, but still a small minority, who will actually be giving practically the whole of our lives to this cause, we neither ask nor expect so much from the vast majority of our members. Our very goal is to save an Americanist system and a civilization in which a person's individual purposes, needs, and desires, and those of his family, are given first consideration. But on the other hand, let me point out and emphasize that we are expecting far more work and dedication and far more sacrifice of other interests on the part of those who do become members of the John Birch Society than you ever thought of giving to any other organization which you joined or even considered joining. For unless we have the cumulative weight and effect of such solid effort and sacrifice on the part of our members as a weapon to be wielded against the communists, we are certainly not going to be able to hold on to even the increasingly confused, dark, and immoral world we now have, much less help to build a better one. And of course, from this particular group, we are looking for real money as well as earnest effort. We hope to have 30,000 dedicated members by the end of 1959. It will be a major accomplishment if we do. But it will certainly take all of the dues money as a general rule from those members just for the organizational expense of recruiting them, supervising their activities, and making them effective. For money with which to work on most of the projects I outlined yesterday afternoon, we have to look for larger sums from other sources than dues. For that purpose, we want to raise $1 million of such outside funds during the year. It will not be easy, and even that amount is an awfully small drop in the bucket against what either the direct communist propagandists or the Lutherite labor bosses are spending against us. But I believe we can get it, and I believe we can make even that much do wonders in adding new courage and new confidence to the anti-communist fight. There are bound to be some mistakes and some waste in something so much like a crash program, but we shall do our utmost by clear thinking and careful planning to keep those mistakes and that waste to an absolute minimum and to make every dollar count. I expect to be conducting in person one top-level two-day meeting like this one per month. We shall soon have tape recordings of this whole presentation, which our coordinators can play for small groups wherever they may be assembled for that purpose. We shall encourage proselyting at all levels for new members of both our local chapters and our home chapter. And we must gain both moral and financial support steadily, or we shall not be in position to do the things that have to be done as fast as we need to do them. For, as I have said, we are not kidding or just talking, and we do mean business every step of the way. As I see it, I'm afraid you have just two alternatives. Either you and tens of thousands like you come into the John Birch Society and, without giving it the whole of your lives, still devote to its purposes the best and most you can offer, with money and head and heart as well as hands. Or, in a very few years, you will by force be devoting all to the maintenance of a communist slave state. So we are asking for a lot. We want you to know it, if and when you sign an application blank for membership in the John Birch Society. That brings us next to a consideration as to the very nature of our undertaking, which needs to be made clear. For all revolutions, as Metternich once pointed out, begin in the best minds and work downward, while most religions begin at the bottom with the masses and gradually acquire both respectability and acceptance at the top. We are neither and both. Far from founding a religion, we are merely urging Protestants, Catholics, Jews, or Muslims to be better Christians, better Jews, or better Muslims, in accordance with the deepest and most humanitarian promptings of their own religious beliefs. And we are simply trying to draw a circle of faith in God's power and purpose, and of man's relationship to both, which is broad and inclusive enough to take each man's specific faith into that circle without violation. Yet the evangelical fervor with which we expect our members to fight the forces of evil and work for a better world makes certain principles with regard to religious groups apply to ourselves. We are not beginning any revolution, nor even a counter-revolution in any technical sense, because while we are opposing a conspiracy, we are not ourselves making use of conspiratorial methods. Yet our determination to overthrow an entrenched tyranny is the very stuff out of which revolutions are made. The net result of these reflections is that we are not a copy of any movement of the past. We are unique. We are ourselves. We are something new, as befits a moving force for a new age. We believe in profiting by all human experience, but we shall make our own amalgam of the organizational metals forged by that experience with the mercury of our own purpose. Without donning sackcloth and ashes, we shall try to inspire saintly men to join our efforts to make this a better world. And without building barricades in the streets, we shall still try to rally rational men to our efforts to preserve the best of the world we already have. And now, gentlemen, I am nearing the end of the semi-formal part of this long undertaking. I have tried to establish fundamental and permanent objectives much broader than the fight against the communist conspiracy, because I am convinced that these ultimate long-range objectives are more important than the defeat of the communist conspiracy. But also because I am utterly convinced that we cannot stop the communists unless our efforts are a part of such a broader and more constructive purpose. Yet, it is the threat of the communist conspiracy that brought us here. Stopping the communists and destroying their conspiracy, or at least breaking its grip on our government and shattering its power within the United States, not only must occupy the front spot and most important spot in all of our thinking, it is the driving danger which should determine our thinking about almost everything else, and most of our actions, too, for the foreseeable future. For unless we can win that battle, the war for a better world will again be carried on through long and futile dark ages. After we have been killed, our children have been enslaved, and all that we value has been destroyed. That is not rhetoric, and it is not exaggeration. It is a plain statement of the stark danger that is rapidly closing in on us right now. It is the imminence and horror of this danger which drives me to so desperate a course as to offer myself as a personal leader in this fight and to ask you to follow that leadership. It is not because I want so frightening a responsibility. And it is certainly not because I think that you gentlemen, as good friends of mine as most of you are, recognize any such qualities of leadership in me as would make me a happy choice for the role. It's just that I don't know where you, or all of us, are going to find anybody else to undertake the job. And because I know in my own mind, beyond all doubt or question, that without dynamic personal leadership, around which the split and frustrated and confused forces on our side can be rallied rapidly and firmly, we do not have a chance of stopping the communists before they have taken over our country. It is not that you would choose me, or that I would even choose me against other possibilities. It is simply that, under the pressure of time and the exigencies of our need, you have no other choice, and neither do I. As to what is expected of you in either effort or money, if you are thinking of halfway measures, we might as well quit now. But I might as well also reveal my fanaticism by telling you that there is no force and no discouragement which could make me quit or even put less of my life and energy into the struggle. If every man in this room should decide, for whatever reason, that he wants no part of my proposals, I would simply go back to small groups of plain citizens in Massachusetts and myself start organizing local chapters of the John Birch Society at the working level. I would be greatly saddened because of my feeling that without all of the most powerful help that can possibly be mustered on our side, in short order and effectively, our chances would be so small. But my determination would not even be affected. The last resort of my own mind has been expressed by Louise Imogen Guiney. To fear not sensible failure, nor covet the game at all, but fighting, 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 die, driven against the wall. I repeat, however, that we do not have to die driven against any wall, nor do we have to lose this struggle at all. As I have said elsewhere, there is enough strength, enough money, enough intelligence, and enough patriotism in the vast business community of America to form the nucleus that will stop and destroy the communist conspiracy, if we can stir it to action in time. What I am proposing here is the mechanics and the leadership through men like yourselves by which it can be stirred to action, and that action made effective. In 1927, some of the communists, after years of work and infiltration by Baroden, Galen, Earl Browder, and other agents, thought they were ready to take over China. Taking advantage of all the splits and confusion in the Kuomintang which they had caused, and of Chiang Kai-shek's problems with his northern expedition for the unification of China, the communists caused a massacre of foreigners by troops he had left behind him, set up their version of a central government in Hankow, and were ready to seize control. Among other measures which Chiang took was to go to the merchants of Shanghai for help. And remember, Chiang Kai-shek was, in their minds, associated with Canton and the government in the south, with which they were not yet even in sympathy. But he was able to convince the merchants of Shanghai of exactly what the communists intended, and that this was a matter of life and death against a ruthless enemy who stopped at nothing. The merchants of Shanghai raised the equivalent of $3 million of American money, and turned it over to Chiang with no strings attached. With that money, with the ability it gave him to feed his soldiers and send his civilian agents into other provinces of China to explain his aims, and with other steps it enabled him to take, Chiang was able to throw the communists out of Hankow, send rats like Baroden, Galen, and Browder scurrying back to their homelands, and save China from the communists for 20 more years. But for the overwhelming forces from the outside, which our government then helped to turn loose on him, Chiang would have been able to keep China free from the communists to this day. But he gained 20 years' respite as it was. Now, gentlemen, just stop and think how much money $3 million American was to the merchants of one Chinese city in 1927. Then tell me that if the American business community or the American people had that kind of determination and were willing to make that kind of sacrifice to preserve their freedom and their inheritance, they couldn't stop the communists. It would be nonsense. A part of our job is not only to have that kind of determination and make that kind of sacrifice ourselves, but to convince others of the necessity of doing so. As one man in this room said to me a few months ago, it is better to spend a quarter or even a half of all we own and save our lives and the remainder of our possessions than to lose lives and total possessions by fighting with too little and too late. I not only agree, I have acted on that principle in my small way. Not only has it seemed to me better to spend the money I had saved in waking up a few more of my fellow citizens to the danger, but I am far more comfortable working 16 hours a day, 7 days per week, on the same problem and without pay than I would be in a concentration camp behind an electrified barbed wire fence. And while I am not actually suggesting quite so drastic a level of work or sacrifice for anybody else at this time, I do want to repeat that we are not going to be saved from concentration camps by those who plan to do the saving every Saturday morning before lunch, or by financial backing of the same order to the anti-communist forces. And I also want to repeat, as we simply must convince more of our complacent friends, that the result of our failure in this fight most positively will be concentration camps, or worse, and soon. Let me repeat just one thing that I said to you yesterday morning. There are in the satellite countries today thousands of men, just like you and me, who only 10 years ago could regularly meet in such groups as I propose. Not only that, but they could go out openly, with and before larger groups, to try to spread the alarm and to stop the communists from taking over their countries. These men now say to each other, but largely to themselves, quote, "If I had only known, if I had only recognized and believed the danger and the horror of communist rule in time, there is nothing I would not have given to save my freedom, my family, my country, if I had only recognized the urgency and the desperate need. Now it is all too late, and any sacrifice, even of life itself, would be entirely in vain." Unquote. We do not have to be too late, and we do not have to lose the fight. Communism has its weaknesses, and the communist conspiracy has its vulnerable points. We have many layers of strength not yet rotted by all of the infiltration and political sabotage to which we have been subjected. Our danger is both immense and imminent, but it is not beyond the possibility of being overcome by the resistance that is still available. All we must find and build and use to win is sufficient understanding. Let's create that understanding and build that resistance with everything mortal men can put into the effort while there still is time. Then, while we are destroying and after we have destroyed the communist tyranny, let's drive on towards our higher goals of more permanent accomplishment, towards an era of less government and more responsibility in which we can create a better world.